Hi, I'm Mike Chumley from the Neurobiology of Aging Labs at TCU. This video is the first of a two-part series to introduce students to paraffin processing and embedding tissue so that you can cut very thin sections that can then be used downstream for microscopy. In this first video, we're going to take tissue that has previously been fixed in formalin or some sort of formaldehyde solution, and we're going to replace all of the water inside the tissue with paraffin. Then we're going to surround that tissue with more paraffin, and we're going to harden it into a block. Now at this point, that block of tissue can be stored indefinitely. The second part of the video, we will take that block of tissue and we will cut very thin sections with a rotary microtome. We can cut sections as small as thin as 8 microns, and we will then take those sections and we will adhere them to microscope slides. Downstream, we can then take those microscope slides and stain them for various types of tissue and look at them under the microscope.
Paraffin processing involves 4 major steps. First of all, you're going to need some tissue. Now this will have been freshly isolated from animals and dropped in some fixative, either formaldehyde or formalin, some similar fixative solution. We're next going to remove a small portion of that tissue that we will then take to an automated processor. The processing actually involves removing water from inside the cells and replacing it with paraffin. We will then take that piece of processed tissue and surround it with even more paraffin, allow it to harden, and we will have a block of hard paraffin with a piece of tissue in the middle. We can store that then long term, or we can immediately cut it on a microtome. We can cut very thin sections, say 8 microns thick, that we will then use for microscopy downstream. You're going to need a number of items to perform this experiment. First of all, you need the tissue and you need a petri dish to hold the tissue. You'll need some scissors or a razor blade to cut a small portion of that tissue off. You'll need forceps to hold the tissue, gloves to protect your hands, and you need a plastic processing cassette. Now this is a small cassette that encloses the piece of tissue, and you can write on this cassette on the flat surface using a special alcohol-resistant pen. So normally we write the animal number, so we denotes which animal the tissue came from. And then as this cassette goes through the processing procedure and is bathed in a bunch of different solutions, the writing will remain on that. We'll then be able to take this to a microtome to section, and we'll know immediately what animal the tissue came from. In order to isolate our piece of tissue that we're going to use for processing, we have a tube already labeled with an animal number, and in that tube are a bunch of tissues that we isolated from the animal. We also have our tissue cassette that we're going to put our tissue in, and the front face of this cassette is where we can write the animal number with our alcohol-resistant pen. Now that'll be protected as the cassette goes through the paraffin processor and it won't come off. Take your tissues and swirl them around in the tube to make sure to loosen them up, and then you're just going to pour them into the petri dish. Now there's a bunch of different tissues here. We are in this experiment using the liver. So here's the liver from that animal. You can see it's pretty large. This was probably an animal that was on the Western diet that has a lot of bad fats in the diet. We're going to cut a small piece of tissue off of one of the lobes of the liver, and you don't want your tissue to be any bigger than 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. So you're looking for a pretty small piece of tissue. You'll actually figure this out as you do it. If the tissues are too large, they won't process properly. If they're too small, they actually over-process and get really brittle. So it's hard to do this the first time, but once you get used to cutting the right size tissue, then you'll be set. You're going to take that tissue and you're going to put it into the cassette that you labeled. And you'll see that cassette's perforated, so the liquids in the processor are going to percolate all over that cassette. Now you'll take it to the paraffin processor. This is the Leica automated processor. This machine is going to be used to process our tissue. It's going to replace the water inside the tissues eventually with wax. So you can open up this machine and push the up arrow and the entire turret moves up. And you can see that there's 12 canisters in here. Some of them have alcohol, some of them have wax. Here's our carrier and our cassette that we previously put our tissue into. And you're going to attach the carrier to the turret. Now we're looking at the control panel, and you'll see there's a bunch of buttons on this control panel. So there's a program button to allow you to program the instrument. There's an agitation button that agitates the cassettes inside of the pans. Start stop buttons, right, left, and up down arrows to move your cursor around when you're programming. If you push the program button, you'll see right now it's on program 4. Program 4 is what we use for livers. So if you hit the start button, program 4 pops up. Now you can use the plus and minus buttons to move around to pick a different program, but we want program 4 because that's for livers. Now on the screen you can see that on the top there's a time, it's 15 minutes, and that's for the first station. Underneath the 15 minutes is the time of day. Now, in order to start this, we push start again. And it won't start because there's an error message. So you'll find errors from W02 to W04. These are error messages just making you check that the wax is melted in the last 3 canisters. You can't set the processor to go around and then try to put your cassettes down into the wax if they're not melted. So for this reason, we really never turn the machine off. We leave it on all the time. So to get past this error message, you push the lock key and the start button at the same time, and it will start putting your cassette down into the first bath, which is an alcohol bath. Once it's down there, you can close up, and you'll see that the agitation starts right away.
Many unbearable hours later.
Once the processing is over, go ahead and open the machine and hit the stop button and the up arrow, and the turret will lift up, and you'll see your carrier that has all of your tissue cassettes above the last wax station. You can shake off a little of the excess wax, and then you're going to go ahead and remove this carrier and carry it over to the paraffin embedding station on some paper towels so you don't drip it all over the floor. Here's our embedding station, paraffin embedding station. You'll see that there's 2 machines here. You can also see that the carriers are sitting over on the right-hand side with our cassettes. The right-hand side machine is cold. The left-hand side of the machine is the hot side, and it has the wax in the very top. Now this needed to be turned on 3 hours before you come to embed your tissues. So you're going to want to leave them in the wax in the paraffin processor until the wax in this machine is melted. The right side of this machine, both sides are hot. There's 2 different hoppers. The left side hopper has the paraffin molds. The right hand hopper is where you're going to put your cassettes. And then there's a center section here that's really cold, and you use this cold section to stick your tissue down in the wax. The wax comes out a little nozzle in the center. Now you want to go ahead and put all of your tissue cassettes in the right-hand side, in the right-hand hopper. You're going to put them in there, and that's going to keep them nice and hot. On the left-hand side, you've got your hot metal molds. This is what you're going to pour your paraffin into. We set it on the hot side so it keeps everything nice and hot. And then we're going to take our cassette out and set it on the hot side. And we're going to put a little wax in our mold. So we've got some wax in the mold, in the bottom of the mold. We're going to keep it on the hot side so it doesn't start to harden. And now we're going to remove our tissue from our cassette. So you can see our little piece of tissue there. You don't need the lid for the cassette, but you want to keep the bottom half of the cassette. So now you're going to take the tissue out of the cassette and you're going to put it into the wax. Now keep the bottom part of the cassette because you're going to need it. Now we take our wax, our molten wax with our tissue. We're going to make sure our tissue is right in the center of the wax. And then we're going to put it on the cold side just until the color changes, which is hardening the wax on the bottom of the tissue, and it holds it in place. You're then going to snap the lid, the bottom half of your cassette down on top, and you're going to fill it with hot wax. Then you can set it back on the cold surface. Now you never ever want the wax to harden and then add more molten wax to the top, because it forms a crease that will break when you try to cut your tissues. Then you just move your cassette over to the frozen side and let it sit for about 30 minutes and it will harden. And while you're doing that, you can keep doing the rest of your cassettes one at a time and put them on the cold side so it hardens. The last one on there, 30 minutes, and then you can start removing them. So when you remove your wax from the mold, you're going to use a metal spatula that sits up on top of the machine. So you take the metal spatula and you're going to put it along the edge of the plastic cassette and the metal cassette, and you're just going to pry the plastic cassette out. And you'll see that it takes a little force, but eventually it will pop out, especially if they are good and hard. It'll pop out of there. You can see your tissue on the bottom there, embedded in wax, and you still have the animal number on the plastic cassette. Now, oftentimes you'll have some wax that spills over, so you need to cut that wax off so that you can see your animal number. And we're going to use this entire piece to cut our sections in the next video. You store it into a container and you're done. To clean up, we want to make sure that we put all of our metal molds back in the left-hand hopper. Try to put them all in there so that they're sitting on the bottom so that they get nice and hot. And we're going to want to clean off both the icy surface and the waxy surface, and we're going to use this little scraper. So on the wax surface, there's molten wax on the hot sides of this thing, and so you can just scrape all of that wax down into the grooves that sit in there. And as you look at this, you'll see that there's grooves that have holes in them and allows the wax to drip down into these drawers that sit underneath those holes. And so you're going to scrape the wax on all of these little sections into the grooves. You'll do it on the right-hand side and you'll do it on the left-hand side. And it takes a little bit of time to get all of that wax off of there and into the grooves. Same thing on the left side. And as you do this, you'll often find that you prefer one side over the other side. So now, where the wax comes out of the nozzle, it's elevated, and so everything drains away from the nozzle. And now we're going to use the pointy end of the scraper, and we're going to draw that through the grooves. And basically what you're going to do is push the molten wax along in those grooves, and you push it in the direction of the little holes, the little drain holes. And as you do this, you'll find out that the wax doesn't drain through the holes as fast as you would like it to, and so you have to go back and forth. It just takes a little bit of time, but you want to get as much wax out of there as you possibly can. We do this on both sides. And usually I don't do a lot of work on the left-hand side other than just setting the hot cassette over there. And so most of the time I don't have as much wax on the left-hand side as I have on the right-hand side, and it doesn't take as long to clean it off. So when you're done, you can turn off the machine. Then you're going to go over to the cold side, and you can turn off the machine here now, or you can do it later, but I like to take the scraper and try to scrape off all the frost that's on the surface of the machine. It is Texas and it's humid, and so you get a lot of frost on the machine. So I try to scrape up as much as possible. And then you can use your hands to just pick up a bunch of the frost, and you can either throw it in a trash can, or the sink is right to the left. So you can do either or. But I'll get as much into the trash can or into the sink as I can, and then I'll grab a paper towel. Normally you can take the paper towel and clean off the surface of the frosty side, and then depending upon how wet your paper towel is, you may want to grab a second paper towel, or you can just fold this one up and take it over and go over the top surface of the paraffin side. So you'll see I can just wipe over the top surface here real quick and call it good. Throw it away, make sure both of them are turned off, and you're done.